Welcome back, 9:13 now. Mike Allen at the First Alert Update Desk. We're still following the latest developments after an American Airlines flight coming from Wichita, Kansas, and carrying 64 people crashed into an Army helicopter carrying 3 while trying to land at Reagan National in Washington, D.C. And minutes ago, we heard from President Donald Trump, who spent much of his address blaming Democrats and diversity hiring practices for the crash. And he did also assure Americans it is safe to fly right now. This morning, rescue operations turned to recovery as all the passengers and crew members aboard the plane and helicopter are thought to be dead. 6 of those passengers were figure skaters from the skating club of Boston, 2 children and their mothers, plus their 2 coaches. Those coaches, Evgenia Shishkova and Vadim Naumov, were former Olympic skaters from Russia. They were all on the flight after a competition that happened in Wichita over the weekend. The mayor of Wichita spoke this morning, talking about how both her city and Washington will recover from this.
This is a terrible tragedy that will unite those in Washington, D.C. and Wichita, Kansas forever.
Now, as for the helicopter and what it was doing, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth says the crew was fairly experienced and had night vision goggles on during a night flying proficiency evaluation that was happening at the time of the crash. Another thing we heard this morning is that there is an air traffic control shortage, and that's been making it difficult to handle a rising number of flights into Reagan National. No word yet, though, on whether or not that was part of the cause of this crash. The airport just opened back up about an hour ago. There was one scheduled flight from Reagan National, to Reagan National from Vegas today, but that one was canceled. Now time for weather.
Now.